Hello and welcome back to another episode of GNG News. Good morning, good evening. This video was filmed at 1 a.m. So, shout out to everyone who's up this early. If you are obviously seeing this early hours in the morning, by the time I put this up, it'll be around 8 a.m. in the morning. So, good morning to everyone in the UK, and if you're in other parts of the world, good evening, good night, and hello. So, I've got about 95% vision in my eye, which was giving me a lot of trouble over the last week or so. So I believe I should be able to do a face cam video maybe this evening. Hopefully, if I'm feeling tip top, I'll be able to get back on with doing vlogs. So without further ado, we are going to get back into reading a book that I have enjoyed listening to the audiobook, enjoyed having heard the story before, but now I want to finish the story for myself. So we're going to get on to chapter 2 of the Darth Plageuis novel. So without further ado, let's get into it. Plageuis wasn't certain how long he remained at Tembrus's side, long enough though that when he rose his legs were quivering and some of the dust from the explosion had settled. Only when he took a few backward steps did he realize that the event had not left him unscathed. At some point, probably when he was focused on murder, a rock or some other projectile had pulped a large area of his lower back. Now the thin tunic he wore beneath his enro suit was saturated with blood. Despite the swirling dust, he inhaled deeply, elixating a stab of pain from his ribcage and a cough that spewed blood into the hot air. Drawing on the force, he numbed himself to the pain and tasked his body to limit the damage as best it could. When the injury ceased to preoccupy him, he surveyed the grotto, remaining anchored in place but turning a full circle. Littering the hard ground, injured hawk bats were chirping in distress and clawing through circles of their own. Far above, a high beam of oblique and dust-moted daylight streamed through the dome large oculus, itself the result of an earlier collapse. Close to the jumble of stone the collapse had piled on the grotto floor sat Tenebrus's small but priceless starship, a rugged non-design. Ally wings and snubbed nose poking from the artless mausoleum the explosion had fashioned, and finally, not meters away, lay Tenebrusly similarly interned. Approaching the ship, Plageuis scanned the damage that had been inflicted on the deflector shield and navigation arrays. Coolant ducts, sensors, and antennae. Tenebrus would surely have been able to effect repairs to some of the components, but Plageuis was out of his depth, lacking not only the Biff's fine motor skills, but his knowledge of the ship's system. Though unique, a marvel of engineering, the system and ship couldn't be traced to Tenebrus. Since both the registry and title were counterfeit, it was possible that the rescue beacon was still functional, but Plageuis was reluctant to activate it. They had arrived at Baldemic in stealth, and he intended to depart in that manner. But how? Again, he squinted into the light pouring in through the oculus. Not even his power and the force was enough to carry him from the floor and up through the grotto's unblinking eye. Nothing short of a jetpack would do, and the ship didn't carry one. His gaze drifted from the oculus to the grotto's curving walls. He supposed he could spider his way along the arched underside of the dome and reach the eye, but now he saw a better way, more a way to accomplish two tasks at the same time. From a spot mid-distance between the ship and rubble pile beneath the oculus, he immersed himself in the force, and with the gesture, not unlike those he and Tenebrus had used in arresting the seething collapse, began to levitate slabs from the ship and add them to the rubble heap, stopping only when he had both exposed the hatch of the ship and was confident he could force leap through the oculus from on top the augmented pile. When he tried springing the hatch, however, he found that it wouldn't budge. He was ultimately able to gain entry to the cockpit by assailing the transpiring steel canopy with a series of force blows. Worming his way inside, he retrieved his travel bag, which contained a comlink, his lightsaber, and a change of clothes, among other things. He also took Tenebrus's comlink and lightsaber and made certain to erase the memory of the navicomputer. Once outside the ship, he peered out of the enro suit and blood-soaked tunic, and trading them for dark trousers and an overshirt, lightweight boots, and a hooded robe. Affixing both lightsabers to his belt, he activated the comlink and called up a map of Baldemic. With scant satellites in orbit, the planet had nothing in the way of a global positioning system, but the map told Plageuis all he needed to know about the immediate area. He took a final look around. It wasn't likely that an Indine would have reason to investigate the grotto, and it was even less likely that another interstellar visitor would find this place. Even so, he spent a moment regarding the scene objectively. Apparently, a particular crushed but costly and salvage-worthy starship, the decomposed body of a birth spacefarer, the aftermath of an explosive event, the scene of an unfortunate accident in a galaxy brimming with sin. Satisfied, Plageuis leapt to the top of a pile, then threw the roof into the remains of the day. The radiant heat of Baldemic's primary beat down on his exposed skin, and a persistent offshore wind tugged at his robes. West and south, as far as eyes could see, was an expansive and azure ocean, curling white where it pounded the coastline. Rugged, denuded hills vanished into sea mist. Plageuis imagined a time when forests had blanketed the landscape, before the indigenous Conmi had filled the trees for building materials and firewood. Now the vegetation survived was confined to the steep-sided gorges that separated the brown hills, a somber beauty. Perhaps he thought there was more to recommend the planet than deposits of Cortus's ore. A resident of Monolist from most of his adult life, Plageuis was no stranger to ocean worlds, but unlike most Muns, he was also accustomed to remote, low-tech ones, having spent his childhood and adolescence on a host of similar planets and moons. With that hemisphere of Baldemic rotating quickly into the night, the wind was increasing in strength and the temperature was dropping. The map he had called up on the comlink showed that the planetary primary spaceport was only a few hundred kilometers to the south. Tenebris had intentionally skirted the port when they had made planetfall, coming in over the northern ice cap rather than over the sea. Plageuis calculated that he could cover the distance to the spaceport by evening of the following day, which would still give him a standard week in which to return to the monolith in time to host the gathering of Sojourn. But he knew, too, that the route would take him through areas inhabited by both elite and plebeian Conmi, so he resolved to travel at night to avoid contact with the noisome and xenophobic reptilian sapiens. There was little point to leaving dead bodies in his wake. Clinching the rope around his waist, he began to move slowly at first, then gathering speed until to any being watching he would have appeared as a dazzling blur, of errant dust evil racing across the treeless terrain. He hadn't run far before he chanced upon a rudimentary trail, impressed in places with the footprints of indigenous, and he paused to study them. Barefoot lower-class Conmi had left the prince, probably fish folk whose thatched roof dwellings dotted the shorelines. Plageuis recognized the size and weight of the reptilians responsible for the tracks, and estimated the time elapsed since they had passed. Drawing himself up, he scanned the dun hills, then sniffed the wind, wishing he were imbued with even a touch of Tenebris's olfactory acuity. Up ahead, he was bound to encounter elite Conmi as well, or at very least their cliffside dome dwellings. Night fell as he resumed his place. The ocean shone silver under starlight, and night-blooming flora scented the humid air with heavy aromas. Predators of any size had been hunted to extinction on the northern island's continent, but the deep gorges were home to countless varieties of vicarious insects that set upon him in clouds as he picked his way through the dense underbrush, lowering his body temperature and slowing his breathing to alter the mixture of gases in his exhalations did little to elude the insects, so after a while he ceased all attempts at warding them off and surrendered to their thirst for blood, which they drew freely from his face, neck, and hands. Let them devour the old Plageuis, he thought, in the dark wood of that remote world, with a salted wind whistling through the trees and a distant sound of waves like drumming, he would take flight from the underworld in which the Sith had dwelled. Awakened from a millennial of purposeful sleep, the power of the dark side would be reborn, and he, Plagueis, would carry the long-forged plan to completion. Through the night he ran, sheltering inside a shallow cave, while the morning mist was advancing from the hollows. Even the blue-scaled indigenous were about, appearing from their huts to cast nets into the crashing surf or paddle boats to stretches of reef or nearby isles. The best of their catch would be carried into the hills to stuff the bellies of the wealthy, with whom rested responsibility for Beldamic's political and economical futures. Their guttural voices stole into the cave that fit Plagueis like a tomb, and he could understand some of the words they exchanged. He chased sleep, but it eluded him, and he deplored the fact that he still had need for it. Tenebris had never slept, but then few biffs did. Awake in the oppressive heat, he replayed the events of the previous day, still somewhat astounded by what he had done. The Force had whispered to him, "Your moment has come. Claim your stake to the dark side and now be done with it." But the Force had only advised. It had neither dictated his actions nor guided his hand. That had been his doing and his doing alone. He knew from his travels, with and without Tenebris, that he wasn't the galaxy's sole practitioner of the dark side, nor Sith for that matter, since the galaxy was rife with predators, but he was now the only Sith Lord descended from the Bane line, a true Sith, and that realization roused the raw power coiled inside him, and yet when he reached out with the Force he could detect the presence of something or some being of some near equal power. Was it the dark side itself, or merely a vessel of uncertainty? He had read the legends of Bane and how he had been hounded by the lingering presence of those he had defeated in order to rid the Sith Order of infighting and return the Order to a genuine harmony by instating the rule of two, a master to embody power and an apprentice to crave it. To hear it told, Bane had even been hounded by the spirits of generations dead Sith Lords whose tombs and manasses he had desecrated in his fervent search for holocrons and other ancient devices offering wisdom and guidance. Was Tenebris' spirit the source of the power he sensed? Was there a brief period of survival after death during which a true Sith could continue to influence the world of the living? It was as if the mass of galaxy had descended on him. A lesser being might have heaved his shoulders, but Plagueis, wedged into his Chanstein tomb, felt as weightless as he would have in a deep space. He would outlive any who challenged him. Hours later, the voices had faded and the insects' feeding frenzy had started anew. A pain aroused Plagueis from tortured slumber. The tunic was adhered to swollen flesh like a pressure bandage. But blood had seeped from the wound and soaked through to the robes. Slipping silently into the night, he limped until he had suppressed the pain, then began to run. Bead of perspiration eparating from his hairless head and the dark robes unfurling behind him like a banner. Famished, he considered radiating one of the local homes and raiding it and feasting upon the eggs of some of the low-caste Conmi, or perhaps the blood of her and her mate. But he reined in his impulses to strike terror for the case of his appetite for destruction, sating himself instead of bats, the rotten remains of fish, and the waves had washed ashore. Hurrying along the black sand beach, he passed within meters of dwellings built from the blocks of fossilized reef stone, but he glimpsed only one indigenous, who, on leaving his hut naked to relieve himself, reacted as if he had seen a apparition, or else in hilarity at the figure Plageuis must have cut in robes and boots on the cliff high above the beach. Artificial lights glimmered once again, astounding the homes of the elite and the proximity of the spaceport, whose obedient glow illuminated a broad area of the southern littoral. His destination close at hand, each incoming ocean wave reverberated inside him, summoning an unprecedented tide of dark energy. The knotted tendrils of time loosened. He had a glimpse into Baldemic's future. Embroiled in a multi-fronted war, a galactic war, in part because of the rich deposits of Cortius, but more as a pawn in a convoluted game, the subservient Conmi turned against those who had mastered them for eons. Lost in reveries, Plageuis almost failed to notice that a massive breakwater now followed the curve of the beach. Stone jetties jutted into a broad, calm bay, and behind the wall a city climbed into a surround of defrosted footstools. Conmi of both classes were about, but interspersed among them were off-worlders of many species, most from neighboring star systems, but some from a distant as the core. The spaceport formed the city's southernmost outskirts, made up of clusters of modular buildings, prefabricated warehouses and hangars, illuminated landing areas for cargo and passenger ships. To a being unfamiliar with isolated worlds, a tour through the spaceport would have seemed closer to time travel, but Plageuis felt at home among the cubicle hotels, dimly lit tapcas, and squad-lit cantinas, where entertainment was costly and life was cheap. Raising the cowl of the robes over his head, he kept to the shadows, his height alone enough to draw attention. With security lax, he was able to circulate among the grounded vessels without difficulty. He ignored the smaller inter-system ship in favor of a long-haul fighter, and even then only those that appeared to be in good condition. Monlist was several hyperspace jumps in distance, and only a ship with adequate jump capability could deliver him without too much delay. After an hour of searching, he found one to his liking, a product of core engineering. The freighter had to be half a century old, but it had been well maintained and retrofitted with modern sensors, suites, and subspace drives. That in bore no legend suggested that the ship's captain wasn't interested in having the ship make a name for itself longer than it was wide. SL-447 had a narrow fantail, a undermount cockpit, and a broad cargo bay doors, which permitted it to take on large freight. With the registry number stored in his comlink, Plageuis angled his way to the Spaceport Authority building at the time of night. That dilapidated structure was all but deserted, save from two thick-necked Commi guards who were sleeping on duty. Loosening the robe sash to provide ready to access to his lightsabers, Plageuis eased past them and disappeared through the main doors. Faint light from unoccupied offices spilled into the dark hallways. On the second floor, he found the registrar's office, which overlooked the largest of the landing zones and the silent bay beyond. A comp that had been an antique 20 years earlier sat atop a desk in a smaller private office. Plageuis placed his comlink alongside the machine and an instant later had sliced into the spaceport control network. A search from the freighter revealed that it did indeed go by a name, the Wugong, out of Ord Mantell. Scheduled to launch the following morning, the ship, with his crew of 8, including one droid, was bound for several worlds in the Oral sector, carrying cargoes of fresh sea life. According to the manifest, the cargo had already cleared customs and was housed in a refrigerated hangar, awaiting transfer to the ship. The good news was the Wooburg's ultimate destination was Ithra, on the far side of the Hadean Way. A side trip to Munlis, therefore, might not strike the crew as too great of a detour. Plageuis called up an image of a freighter's captain, whose name was given as Ellen La. Opening himself fully to the force, he studied the image for a long moment, then exhaling slowly, he stood, erased all evidence of his technological intrusions, and returned the comlink to his robes inner pocket. The Weeble had been waiting for him. Chapter 3. Waybon. So, thank you all for watching another episode of Ginger News. If you have enjoyed this, don't forget to leave a like on the video. I will be back with more of these videos very, very soon. I appreciate your time for today. Sorry about my terrible reading, as the good thing is you guys are able to see the book in front of you, so if you don't want to follow along with my reading, you can just pause this and read the page, and then wait until I get to the next page and read it for yourself. So you're kind of getting the book for free, but I'm trying to get better at reading, so I'm just essentially trying to read things that I enjoy. I've had people buy me books before, but I'll be honest, I don't want anybody to buy me books. I want to do it for myself, and I want to read things that I enjoy. And I enjoy Star Wars, I enjoy science fiction, I enjoy a lot of complex franchises that I know a lot of the lore, but I don't know how to spell a lot of the names. So the only way you're going to get better at that is by obviously reading. So hence why I'm buying all these short little novels. If there's anything like Star Wars related that you think I might like and would be a good read for me, or a good science fiction read, let me know in the comment section down below. Otherwise, have yourself a lovely day. Shout out to Strapnel Varga. We should be doing some content at some point soon. Also, don't forget to go check out his channel as well. See if we can try and get him to 500 subscribers is good, but 1,000 subscribers is really what we want to get to. So let's try and get Strapnel Vargo to 1,000 subscribers, as he puts in a tremendous effort at what he does, and he's a good friend. But anyways, I will catch you all in another episode. I will be back later this evening, probably doing some sort of face cam type video if I'm feeling up for it. I've got one mission left now in Hitman 2, and then that's done. And then I'll be getting on to playing some other types of games. If there's anything that you recommend me to play on the PlayStation 4 or on Steam, let me know, because I have a gaming laptop and I also have a PS4 as well. But apart from that, have yourself a lovely day. Don't give up on yourselves, and I'll see you all soon.